Hey, let's go. We got the Arthur's clear confirmation. Let me pull this up real quick. We got to talk about this realistically, so strap in. Congratulations, Arthur, Xenos, and the homies. Yo, nice old mega emote, bro. But look at the moon! No, I'm just kidding. In realistic perspective, however, we have ourselves a little bit of a quick thoughts here. And he said, thoughts on Fru. Sorry, I don't have premium and flashbang incoming. Oh, no, I'm kidding. So I do just want to read what he said and kind of put things into perspective about how he feels, and then we can, whoops, take it from there. So here's the thing. I already have my own opinion about Fru, and I'm going to compare what he says versus what I say. To give you clarification right now, in terms of progression point, I'm at phase 3. So, I've already watched the world race, and let me give you some background as well. Me personally, I like doing every piece of content, whatever is opportunity available, blind. I don't look at guides. I don't look up how to do the thing. I like to figure it out on my own. Yoshi P designed this video game with that perspective in mind, where you have to learn how to apply your own thought process in terms of like how to do the fight. So if you don't know, there is a video, I'll post it in the description. Not that you have to watch it, but just kind of what I did, where I tried to blind prog the fight for myself, just like for fun. I like to do content for fun. I don't like take it all seriously. So when I was done with that, I've actually changed my perspective on how to blind content, because unfortunately, with the community in mind, doing content blind in this game is very difficult when you either want to do it blind the entire way through, or whenever as soon as you try and like host a party or find a static, it kind of depends on like what it boils down to. A lot of hardcore players will use the first day or week to do it blind, but then from there, as soon as like a infograph comes up or something, they're like, give me the information and like let's go get it popping. So towards the end of Endwalker and with this expansion, I've made myself a bit of a test, if you will, where I want to get a reaction, like a first time entrance into the piece of content that exists. And then once I've had that moment and I've had my fill, then I just want to be like spoiled heavy about whatever happens in the fight. So I have always avoided the world race, every single race since the beginning of there being the world first race. This is the first time. I even skipped the Dawn Trail Savage race. I wanted to watch the Ultimate race as my first experience because I love Eden raids, and so I watched the entire world race, and I was very shocked when Kindred, shout out to Kindred, Clips is the homie, when they cleared on like day 3, like right before the cutoff. I was there watching it on his stream and I freaked out, and it was lit and it was incredible. However, Ultimates normally take a week, and this one took less than 3 days, and that to me is a massive issue. But that's how we are today. Let's talk about what Arthars has to say now that he's cleared through with Xenos. First off, I need to emphasize this Ultimate is fun. Don't get me wrong, I don't hate it, but it's also not one of my favorites as well. It's fun for what it is, a shorter and easier Ultimate, but still considered an Ultimate overall in my books, but a much lower end one, probably that level of Uhu. That is a statement. I do not hate this fight. This, however, doesn't mean I cannot criticize it. So let's freaking go. Few things I want to say about this Ultimate. 1. This Ultimate did not do Eden's raid in 5.0 any justice. Not at all remotely feeling like an epic step up versus the other Ultimates. Now this I 100% agree with. For me, I'm actually very content with the fact that it was Fatebreaker being phase 1. I'm still, after going through the phases and watching the fight, I'm very convinced that the hardest phase is phase 1, which I think is very very bizarre. It's if you don't have an opportunity yet to do it in Party Finder, let me tell you right now, in Party Finder, it sucks. It sucks to do Fru in Party Finder. It's absolutely like insane. People are prog lying, putting up like P2, P3 prog, and they're not consistent with doing phase 1 because mobility and uptime and simplicity. Despite it being like an easier Ultimate in comparison, people don't do phase 1 correctly, and it's driving a lot of players insane, me included, where they want to actually see phase 2 or phase 3, but they can't do that because people want to get carried through the Ultimate, and I think that's doing like the fight and the game itself a huge disservice. This is probably the most accessible Ultimate on content and will be the most puggable one. I do agree with that. And I have my own points I'll point out as well, and we'll go into that further. The hype of the Ultimate is sadly, as feared, started and ended the moment the release of the patch's poster. Showing Pandora is major spoiler and hype only the first look, 100%. Major disappointment because we expected one more phase/boss appearance after, I'll talk about that. Since we already knew about this boss from patch poster, there isn't any much more hype compared to seeing Perfect Alexander Final Omega their first time. Yes. Very minimal effort in the puzzle, mech switch is solved by people without even trying. They mentioned before that the puzzle in this Ultimate will be eye-opening, by the way. This puzzle solved itself when people just kill the white crystals, don't make DPS checks for the dark ones, and then Gaia just smashed 50% health off the boss. People just proceeded to prog with that, and it turned out that it was the puzzle. Some people, till this day, probably don't even know how to actually fail the puzzle. That is the puzzle, I guess. Least phases, least bosses, and least unique mechanics in all Ultimates. I cannot believe actually that 1-to-1 Savage mechs being actually implemented into this fight with similar Savage-worthy variances. There is literally no futures rewritten here, very, very weak recreation and reimagination of Eden's story. It's literally Reen and Gaia throughout. DSR's alternative timeline was peak, Omega and Ultimate's ascension to full power, Perfect Alexander perfecting itself, and Golden Bahamut was way better in Minstrel's imaginations. I don't mind these kind of low effort Ultimates if we could get 3 in an expansion, but this kind of standard is taking up 1 out of 2 Ultimates per expansion is a serious letdown. Lamau, yet again, DPS check. Picto for staying OP has been the entire balancing problem of this game at the moment, and I don't know why SE doesn't see this as a problem at all. This is concerning. Where's Fatebreaker? Light Element. Why are there still so many potential and basics missing in this fight? Last phase, horrible visuals and exoflares, too much VFX, too much tank responsibility, which makes honestly everyone else boring, unless you're a healer, I suppose. Certainly not one to remember down the road. This is potentially the last major... Oh, sorry. It is fun if you find Arcadia fun. It's not up to the expectation if you think Arcadia is also not up to expectation. Certainly not one to remember down the road. This is potentially the last major hype for a raid-themed Ultimate, and it is sad it's not as what a lot of people hoped and expected. 7.2 Savage and 7.3 Ultimate needs a serious makeover. Sadly, I hate to say it, since I anticipated this, our Savage and Ultimate up till 7.1 is at its lowest point for endgame difficulty. Can't wait to PF it though. I think a lot of, in general, Pug and midcore players will be happy when they'll be able to get their an on-patch Ultimate clear, even in Party Finder. So, let's digest this. With the first point, this Ultimate did not do any justice for the Eden raids. I 100% agree with that, and let me kind of explain to you why. We did a tier list, if you will, to kind of talk about the ideal expectation on what we could or could not see for boss fights from the Eden raid tier, as well as the Ultimate. So I expected, granted, I knew Fatebreaker would have been in the fight, not through the spoiler. I already just knew that he would have been in there, but I was thinking that Voidwalker would have been in there because literally Gaia is in Voidwalker. Like, if you don't know the lore to the biggest degree, I'll give you like a tiny TLDR. You know, we're trying to go figure out what happened to the other side of the Flood of Light. We go over there, we find out that there's like a giant Sin Eater thing over there. It's the first Sin Eater ever created, and there was like a thing called a Voidwalker and like a person in armor with a sword, and it turns out that that person with the armor and sword is literally Gaia. And I'm so shocked that they did not like give them the go-ahead to put that boss in the fight. That boss should have just been phase 1. I was so shocked to see that it was actually just Fatebreaker. I was really hyped that it was still Fatebreaker, but I really did wish it was Voidwalker, and kind of like segueing into the storytelling about how their memories came to be. Realistically, the ultimate concept of Futures Rewritten, I think, was supposed to be about like rewriting the future fate of what had happened, but it was supposed to be like a retell, right? Realistically, I assumed that yes, Ascians had taken over Shiva, and the idea was to actually remove the influence away from Shiva to then remove the influence off of Gaia, because Lawgriff is still a thing and so is Metron, and both of them would have combined into Pandora as we know it today, but then you would have acquired their power in order to fight like God Metron. But that's not a thing in this Ultimate. I was just expecting there to be like 6 or 7 phases, and I'm actually very convinced, this is my first big point, I was very convinced that there actually was a 6th phase. However, they took it out because that phase was actually beyond the threshold of like the 20 minutes that it was supposed to be, sort of thing. So I think to kind of compensate, they just, instead of shortening other phases to squeeze that one in and give us that like epic boss battle that we were supposed to get. They instead just took the whole thing out and then just reworked Pandora so that the boss phase was like a little bit longer, and like GG's. So that's my issue. I as much as I think that Pandora is godlike boss design and the whole entire fight, like design wise, was really high key. The fact that it was the final boss and there was nothing else, like I didn't really understand why the story like was what it was for a retelling of the Ultimate. I thought it was like very bizarre. So and also like if you want to know like a quick synopsis, the phases, there's 5 phases, but the phases only require 4 bosses from the Ultimate, which is expected because like that's what they did. It's Fatebreaker, which is E11, it is Shiva, which is Eden 8, then it is Oracle of Darkness, which is E12 part 2, and then they bring back part 2 of E8, which is Horace Velgar Shiva, and then Oracle of Darkness, and then they both combine into Pandora, which is like the big bad. So they only technically used 4 fights and 4 bosses, like more or less. And then if you somehow like failed the phase 4 puzzle and you like failed to keep the fragment of fate alive, then you would actually defeat phase 4 and then transition to phase 5, but you would actually encounter Eden 12 part 1, which is forbidden, which is the promise, which 100% like should have been a boss in the fight and wasn't. Now, I am still a firm believer that in this game, content is accessible by anyone and everyone. But there is a very big difference between accessibility by working for it on content and on patch versus just going and getting it because like it's available easily. So what I'm trying to say is like if you want to do such a ultimates such as UCOP, UUT, DSR, or top, you know, UCOP, UU, and T are very easy to unlock because the content is already 2 to 3 expansions old, and you can go in, unsync it, mount farm, glam farm, and then just go do those ultimates. That's fine, whatever. DSR on top, however, granted that both fights for unlocking those fights are not as easy as they were with the older, like you can still do P4 and P8, and like you still have to actually like do the fight relatively, even if you're doing it unsynced. And you're literally unlocking the 2 hardest ultimates in the game as of right now. So granted, the accessibility window has increased pretty high for P8 and P4. Those ultimates have not been opened wider for accessibility, which is okay because their difficulty is very high in comparison. Now, with Fru being the ultimate that it is, and as much as M1 through 4 were very fun Savage raids for people to get into, they're still kind of holding hands just a little bit in comparison to what was expected. So personally for me, I expected Dawntrail, as they mentioned in the keynotes, that Dawntrail's content would be more difficult as they were requested by the player base that found the Endwalker expansion to be a bit too easy outside of the Ultimates and the Criterion Savage. So once we actually got our hands on like dungeon content in the trials, if you actually don't know, some of the dungeons in trials in Dawntrail are actually like insanely difficult, especially for like a first time exposure. So that's actually really incredible. So I think that people were just thinking that they were going to keep on riding that high and release the Savage tier. Now, realistically, the Savage normal tier is very good. I actually find it to be very challenging and very difficult in mine, which is incredible. The Savage, however, I actually think was a step down in comparison to the normal version, because there's one thing that the dev team for the battle content for Ultimates and Savage Rage refused to let go, even though they gave us like a little bit of a feeling of it in the second fight, but they just stopped doing that after that overall, and that was really upsetting. Realistically, what they did with M1 in the normal version, so if you don't know, the first raid, M1 normal, has an attack called Mauser, which is a moment where she starts to kind of select different tiles and then give you like an indication on which ones she plans on breaking. In the normal version, which ones get broken, granted that there is a fixed number of attacks that go off, the actual pattern of breakage is very random, and it's kind of hard to figure out what they're doing. But in the Savage version, it is extraordinarily organized, and that is where they kind of take it like a little too far in terms of creating like a Savage variant. The normal version of that mechanic is actually harder than the Savage version because of its lack of organization. Another example of a raid tier fight that we had this expansion patch so far was M2. In M2, they actually kept it in the Savage version versus Honeybee Lovely. It's the Alarm Pheromones. Alarm Pheromone in the normal version, they kind of give you the indication of like, hey, bees appear outside the arena and they just start cleaving all over the place and they give you like an arrow to give you the indication as to where. In the normal version, they have one that is insanely random. They make like 14, or no, it's like 16 bees appear, 2 for each character, and they target people in terms of like where their position is at, and it gets locked in, and then they just kind of one after another 16 times. It's incredible, actually. That's the best mechanic that they designed this entire raid tier. They kept that, however, in the Savage version, and that is the #1 mechanic in the entire raid tier. If the boss stayed in the middle and was not able to actually chase after the tank player that had the aggro, then they would have had to figure out how to maximize efficiency of kind of baiting those bees out and away from the hitbox without making it be like overly difficult. But instead, the party finder has compensated for this Mario Kart strat, which means that like you just kind of drag the boss around like go-kart style, you know, run like an entire lap around the arena, and that way you can at least kind of force them all in a pathway that hopefully can kind of keep it safer for you to do. There's downtime and it's a lot harder to do damage, but at least people can survive and be safe. And even with that execution of the mechanic, it's still not difficult enough. So due to that fight being Mario Kartable, like M3 is fine. Like it's an actually epic fight. It's my personal favorite out of this here. I love M3 the most. It's like the best fight. And M4 is there. And here's the thing, all of these fights would have been a lot more difficult and a lot more challenging if Picto wasn't as strong as it currently is today, which again, Arthars mentions like down the road. So we'll talk about that. Third point, the hype of the Ultimate is very, very feared and sad, unfortunately. So as much as I absolutely loved seeing Pandora be on the poster, I get that like to a small degree, it was like their way of hyping up the patch. Like this, the 0.1 patch is not commonly like the super hype crazy patch. It's just like the one that they start kind of introducing some stuff, which is fine. You know, you get the alliance rare, you get some story, not usually a trial, then there's the ultimate, there's like another thing somewhere in there, whatever. Now I think that like as much as the ultimate being the poster like thing of the art, I think it's really cool, but I think this actually caused a lot of speculation, because for the first time in history, they actually gave us the hint and name of the ultimate, right? During the US keynote, they were like, yeah, it's actually going to be the Eden one. We're skipping Stormblood story. They gave us Eden raid, and showing us Pandora as the spoiler for the boss. Everybody was hyped, like, oh my god, like it's the final boss. But then people were like, wait, Square Enix doesn't ever do this. Maybe there's actually another boss after that one, but they're just showing us what they look like combined because that is the plan. So people started theorizing. Turns out that like, nope, they actually just gave us the final boss. And I think actually a lot of people, and I think to my issue as well, once I saw the actual Phase 5 cutscene for Fru, I did realize that it was actually the final boss. But here's my issue. There is actually, the whole entire Ultimate was re-voiced, everything. They redid all the voice lines for that fight. So it gave me the impression, after actually like listening to the voice lines in English, because Kindred got there towards the end, I'm so convinced that at some point in time, there was a 6th phase. And the objective was to actually defeat them, to be like, cool, you can receive our blessing and actually go fight him. But I think that they redid everything for that fight. And again, I don't know exactly how they did it or what exactly that they did, but Fru at some point was a dramatically different fight than what it is right now, back then when they were working on the Ultimate, and they just gave us this. And don't get me wrong, like the boss design for it was incredible. Here's my thing actually. What I have here is what on the right side is the crossroads art. The left side is what the boss looks like in game. Now, I'm very like over-tuned to the details. Sometimes I pay attention to my gosh. I pay attention too much to details where I honestly look at something and I'm like, no, this is something different. So when I looked at the hair color for Pandora in the Crossroads art on the right side, you know, the hair color is much lighter. Even though the lighting in the background is very bright, I was like, oh, there's something different about it. And then you see on the left side, this is what the final version looks like for Pandora, and that's the boss in game. So ideally, when we actually saw this boss, I was very shocked by the design that they selected for this, because as much as it is the final boss, I did think to myself that maybe because the hair color, I know that it's like such a small detail, but because the hair color is different, I thought that they actually got jebaited by the puzzle. I thought that the puzzle actually required some kind of specific tuning balance of light and dark in order to allocate for the design that she has in the art versus the game. But when they actually killed the boss and they got the title and then they showed the ending and then I like saw the totem appear, I was like shocked. I was like, wait, there's no way that that's the actual final boss. And then, you know, there was one moment where Echo actually saw the tree and I was like, that's the debate. So Pandora is actually like not the final boss. It's just a trick. The tree actually is actually like the puzzle. Even though the puzzle is in phase 2, you have to do something to the boss in phase 4 to change that fragment into something different in order to fight that boss versus this one. And this one's a trick. But then I had it backwards, and the tree is just a failsafe. So if you actually get the tree, you just wipe, and then you gotta actually get to Pandora. And I didn't know that. So to Arthur's point, showing Pandora is a major spoiler, and the hypeness that it appeared when the art was displayed during that one live letter was incredible. It was awesome to see it. However, they need to never ever do that again. Not because it didn't work here, but because I think that they were trying to like bait people into thinking that this was the final boss and that there was something different about it that we had to kind of get like our eyes on. But then it turns out that it's actually the final boss. So they can never do that again. Because every other boss, like when you fight Yukab and you get to go to Bahamut, you see Bahamut like just land and then he turned and just goldened and just like, what's up, you know? The actual watching the transformation, not in cutscene form, of seeing Thornton and Ultima turn into their final versions is really, really cool. And the cutscene that you have with Perfect Alexander literally going mega mega mode into the transformation situation was awesome. And like the most random thing of Top having Omega like feel the emotion of Alpha to turn into Alpha Omega was the most unexpected thing ever, and the godlikeness of that fight and all the other fights inclusively were just insane. So like a lot of people were very underwhelmed by Pandora, not only because the reveal was provided very early on, but because people were so heavily convinced that the fight wasn't long enough, even though it is 18 minutes long, that there was just another phase. So again, I think that there was at some point a 6th phase, but they just took it out because that phase must have been like 4 or 5 minutes long, and it went beyond the threshold of their 20-minute time that they tried to not go over. So instead of just trying to squeeze it all in somehow and like removing like bits and pieces, they just took it out completely. So there's something that I will also provide as feedback that goes to the dev team. I need them to stop limiting themselves in terms of a time limit. Yes, ultimates are 20 minutes long, and that's like what they want to keep it as a cap. Raise the ceiling, like go to 25 at the least. Even getting an extra 5 minutes, I guarantee you, if this was an extra 5 minutes, whatever their 6th phase was that they hid or got rid of, we would have seen it, and everyone would have been debated again like we had expected, because it would have been really cool. So there's that. The puzzle efforts in the mechanic was found without trying, and what's really upsetting, and it was translated, is that they said that the puzzle in the Ultimate for Fru would be very eye-opening, meaning as in like it was kind of like a what in the world kind of moment. Now the problem with that though is that it was very obvious. It wasn't even obvious, it was just found on accident. People were just trying to figure out ways to optimize it. During the race, a lot of the contenders were just using caster LB3 because they just assumed you had to break all of them. But then people were just like, let's stop doing that and let's just break the light ones because they're bigger than the dark ones. And then by just getting rid of the light ones, everyone was like, oh look, Gaia's getting powered up by the dark ones. Let's watch what happens. And then she does 50% to the crystal and saves Shiva, which I was like, oh, that's cool. But like, then what? Then you see the little crystal thing fall out of the, which is cool. But then you're like, what happens next, right? Because the result of that, regardless if you do it or don't do it, you fight Oracle of Darkness. But the difference is that the memory of fate won't appear if you don't do it correctly. So the unfortunate thing is that that puzzle was too obvious, like blatantly way too obvious. And I was going to do a bit of like a review when I actually cleared the ultimate, because I'm doing it with like a mid-core group. We're kind of like having fun, like doing our thing, like it's not like a big deal. But I've actually wrote down these notes with relations to the ultimate, and so I have so far wrote down what I've done progression-wise. But I'm gonna just show you phase 2. I will do a video later on to cover the entire ultimate, but I want to first get that clear because I have a lot of thoughts about the fight overall. Now, phase 2 overall is like fine. Like it's not difficult, it's not easy, but it is what it is, and I'm cool with it regardless. However, I have a very big paragraph kind of talking about the ad phase specifically. What I wrote down is that the crystals should have been shattered crystals as like a name, because if you actually get to the ad phase and then Shiva does like the, you know, the screech into the frozen part, there's just 8 crystals that appear. You have crystals of darkness and crystals of light. The sizes of them are different. So it kind of becomes obvious that, you know, break the big ones, don't break the small ones. Or like Gaia's there and like she's darkness and there's dark crystals, so maybe like don't touch those. And like Reen is bad because like she's light, so then get rid of those, right? Like it was kind of obvious that's what it was. What I think that they should have done was they should have been called like shattered crystals or some kind of crystals, or crystals of empty memory crystals, something. But what the puzzle should have been was that they're all blank crystals. They're not tied to an element, which is what it was like in the first. And the elements need to be infused with darkness to power up Gaia so that she can save Shiva. So what would have happened was, instead of there just being 8 random crystals, they would have had Shiva target 4 people that are farthest by proximity from her position with like these light puddles. The ones that already exist in the phase itself. There's like these big red puddles that target people that are closest to the light crystal, and that's it. So, but they just do that already. And then there's a tether eventually that you get to use to kind of like bait around that crystal, and that's also like part of the mechanic, and that's literally it. What they should have done was, if Shiva targeted the 4 farthest players, it would have forced those 4 players to actually like take the light puddle and put it on the big crystals and turn them into like half light crystals, I'll say. And by doing it, you know, like if you have to hit the puddle like 2 times on each crystal, it would have formed a tether like it does as well. And the tether would have needed to appear if the crystal got hit twice. So like if you actually took the crystal puddle and you like missed the crystal the first time, but the second one you did, then the tether would not appear, and that's part of the puzzle. By doing that, the puddle would have needed to be stretched across, because, you know, if the tether currently doesn't do that. Like the tether is just a tether. But if what they should have done was in like a proximity tether, so if you're too close to it and you get hit by the puddle, it'll one-shot you. But what you should do instead is have the tether be stretchable so that it does very little damage to you, but it still adds light to the crystal and turn it into like a pure crystal of light. And then once that happens, then the vuln up or vuln down that was on it disappears and turns into a vuln up so that you can destroy it. That's for the light crystals only. The 4 players that were closest to Shiva would get these like dark tethers above their head, and it would drop these like little dark towers. And those are the cones that you just have to like point away from the people that are doing the light mechanic, which is what they do also in the actual version. But what they should have done was you put the dark tether on top of the blank crystals that are closer around Gaia in the middle, and take that cone and actually target the smaller crystals. So like if you have like a square, I'll show you like an MS Paint version. So let's say that Shiva is this middle section here. She's covered in her ice. This is Gaia. There's like the 4 big crystals of light, and then the dark ones are the crystals of dark. What would have happened was, if the player that stands like right here stands there, then they would have gotten hit by the cone, and it would have actually gone this way to actually power up the crystal here. But if the player that's here baits the cone this way, and it hits the player that's here, then they would get hit and suffer like a damage down, mark of morality, and then they would die. So what they would have to do then is they would have to move here. And because they're closest to this one, it would have been the cone to go like this. And then you would literally have to create like a whole scenario. And by doing these cone hits, there's like a couple that appear. Whatever number of hits that appear to bait these, because right now they go into cardinal out. If you actually use the cone to actually turn the other crystals into dark without hitting the light ones, then eventually they would all become infused crystals of darkness. And the puzzle would have been to create these to actually empower Gaia, and then she would become stronger as a result. But again, that puzzle doesn't happen because when you actually get to that phase, all the crystals already appear. So the simple objective is to just get rid of the light ones, and then automatically you just kind of skip the rest of that add phase. So for an eye-opening mechanic, it's actually very like that's it. Like that's how I felt as well just watching it. Because I progged the fight on day one and managed to get to Enrage phase 1, which was really cool. I saw Shiva once, we died to Diamond Dust, and it was incredible. Then I just watched the world race from that point forward. I watched Kindred and Lucrezia both get to add phase, and I was marveled by it. But there was one thought process I've had my entire time, and I was like, where's the puzzle? Because it's an ultimate, there's supposed to be a puzzle. Turns out that they saw the puzzle already, and then I was confused by it, because I was like, did they just gotta like not break the dark ones, and then just like break the light ones, and that's it? And then that's what they didn't do that. The LB3 caster instead broke all of them. Which I was like, that doesn't seem correct. I think you gotta just break them, the light ones. And then they started doing that, and then lo and behold, that was the puzzle. Like, it almost seems disrespectful that that was the puzzle that they created and they thought that we weren't going to figure that out in like a day. Realistically, if there was yet another puzzle down the road, kind of like how it happened with Uwu. If you don't know about Uwu, the world race was happening and people were progging that fight for days, but they couldn't figure out how to actually transition into Ultima. It was because they couldn't figure out that, you know, you have to actually awaken each primal. And by awakening each primal, that gave you the LB buff that you needed to actually like surpass the later phases to get to Ultima. So that the puzzle should have been something like that with the fragments and memories and that sort of thing. But alas, like it just wasn't. And later on, when you actually like do phase 3, there's only one relativity and like an apocalypse, and like there's I also think that phase 3 should be a much longer phase, and there's something missing in that fight that just doesn't make sense to me. But then when you get to actual phase 4, then if you do the puzzle correctly in phase 2, then the fragment of fate would appear in phase 4, and then the simple objective is to just not break that crystal. If you break the crystal but complete the boss phase, then you get to phase 5, but you fight Eden's Promise, and then you just wipe. So it was overly obvious yet again that with that puzzle in phase 4, you just have to not destroy the crystal, and that's it. The crystal pulses and does like an AoE, but that's it. There's nothing else to do with that puzzle, unfortunately. In my mind, I was thinking like, oh, if there is a crystal that falls and goes into Reen as Shiva with Mitron's influence, maybe that there's one for Gaia, but in the Oracle of Darkness, because again, Mitron has taken over Shiva, and Logrif is still influenced as well to create the Oracle of Darkness. So I thought to myself that you have to actually take out the influence of Logrif so that Gaia would be herself, but in Oracle form, and would have had to figure out how to remove the influence of Mitron out of Shiva. And then the both of them would have been like in their like primal forms, but like conscious. And as a result, they would have been like, hey, you know, the memory of fate is incorrect. And like they got, I thought that they were going to somehow get like absorbed into the memory crystal and then burst, and then was Pandora. Then you would have to fight Pandora, and then by defeating Pandora, she would give you the buff of light and darkness that you use to like make Mitron appear, and then it's like the tree in Mitron or something of the nature. But like they just didn't do that. So to Arthur's point about the story and the actual thing happening with the fight was like, I was just very shocked that with the story mode and storytelling in this Ultimate, it's very lackluster in comparison to what they did with like DSR and Top. And like even Top was so wild sideways of a thing. So like I'm just very shocked that they didn't do anything with the story, and the objective was to just fight Shiva and Oracle of Darkness in like a fast-paced Ultimate of just execution. Now, as a result of the news surrounding the ease of this Ultimate in comparison to the others, I had myself another theory. I had a theory that maybe they deliberately designed the ultimate like this for one of two reasons. One is highly unlikely that they would make a harder level of difficulty. They're not going to do that. The ultimate is the hardest, and I think that's committed. However, I figured that DSR is the story-based ultimate from Heavensward, and Omega is the raid-based ultimate from Stormblood. They skipped the story of Stormblood, not because they didn't have a fight or that the weapon design wasn't good. I think it's actually more so that because the story is the story. Like cinematically, the story is incredible. Like Heavensward as MSQ was incredible. Stormblood's MSQ was very, very good. So I think what they actually wanted to do was skip Stormblood's story so that, because the 7.1 ultimate is usually designed to be harder than the 7.3 or the 0.3 versus the 0.1, whatever. So I think that they want to create a story-based ultimate in the 7.3 patch moving forward, or just the 0.3 patch in general, so that they can always make that the harder ultimate, but also as a result of that difficulty, make it more cinematic. I think that the Eden ultimate was designed to be much less cinematic because it's just the raid story. A lot of people don't, to their surprise, they probably think that there's not a lot of people that actually do the raid for the sake of the story. That's not true. We love the lore through and through, so of course we know the raid story, but I guess they were trying to reorganize the release of ultimates so that the raid-based ultimate didn't require like a cinematic storytelling, but was just like a ultimate of execution. That way, the story actual based ultimate would be cinematic because it can easily tie into the story. So if you don't know, they haven't revealed the 7.3 ultimate yet. I already can tell you from my own personal opinion that it's not going to be Hades, it's going to be Seat of Sacrifice's Warrior of Light. The objective is unclear, but I'm just assuming that Hades will be in the ultimate, but the design of the boss fight will be surrounded by the Warrior of Light. And you basically have to fight what inevitably becomes the Warrior of Darkness as the final boss fight. That's my assumption. I don't understand why Hades would be the final boss fight. I think that Warrior of Light is actually just much better. So I'm expecting the final boss fight for 7.3 Ultimate to be the Warrior of Darkness. And because cinematically that trial alone is very cutscene-esque, they can easily do exactly that, but with the Ultimate for 7.3. So, and to Arthur's point as well, this is the ultimate with the least phases. It's got technically 5, but it's less. It's not technically like T is less, but there's still more bosses, I guess, in a sense, sort of thing, kinda. Maybe it's not entirely true though, because but it is. I don't know. The biggest issue is that they just reused all the mechanics from the previous raid. So relativity is reused, but organized more and differently. It's actually very straightforward. Diamond Dust, Light Rampant is more organized. Once again, the similar situation with Hello World from top. Hello World in O12S is harder than the one from top. So Light Rampant is easier in Fru than it is in EAS. Yes, I know it's insane to say that out loud, but it's just true. There's 3 relativities in the O12S fight that kind of stretch across 8 minutes, which is cool. But there's only 1 relativity, and it's just kind of 3 relativities shrunk together into 1. And again, it's just too organized to not make it be obvious where to go and what to do. You just have to kind of keep on trying until it just makes sense. So the recreation and re-imagination Eden story is very missing. I don't understand why it's even called Futures Rewritten. It should just be called the War of the Oracles or something like that, just to kind of compensate for it. Now, to his point, I actually want to touch on that a little bit. So he said that he doesn't mind if we can get low effort ultimates, but even though it doesn't make sense to me though, because I'm pretty sure this ultimate was being worked on at the same time as DSR on top. So this does feel like if it wasn't designed to that degree, it sounds like it's something that they were kind of reusing on a constant basis ultimate wise. And I'm honestly convinced that there's 3 things. 1, if this is what they made, then there's probably hopefully something down the pipeline that's going to increase the tier of difficulty, because as much as ultimates are really difficult and very fun, I think that people kind of scoff a little bit at ultimates, especially the older ones. UCOP, U, and T are just looked upon as like Savage plus raids, and they're ultimates, but they're not necessarily difficult anymore. Whereas DSR on top, like they're difficult because they're longer fights, and like, you know, there's just a lot of like moments where you can fail easily. You can still fail easily in UCOP, UWU, and T as well. However, the leniency of those ultimates is kind of very easy to like scoff over, and it's not like a big deal because the DPS check is very inexistent, especially because like the fights have been synced down horrendously. So if this is a low effort ultimate where it took them like, you know, a couple of months to be like, hey, let's just like kind of throw this together and like just do what it is and then just say like go for it. If they did create 3 of these, then I would be cool with that. However, I actually want them to create an ultimate, but like if they make Fru as it is right now, this is not the Arthur said that it is on like it's an ultimate overall in his book, but like a lower ended one. I don't even know how much of this I can consider to be an ultimate, granted like it is. And again, it's week 2, so you know it's again still too far ahead. But I actually think that this ultimate serves as a method for them to create a difficulty of content that fits in between Savage and Ultimate. When I think of Ultimate, like I think of, you know, the fight is difficult from start to finish the entire time. There's no break and you have to sit there and pay attention the entire time without question. I don't think you have to do that in Fru. I think that once you start to understand what to do and where to go, it's actually pretty smooth sailing. All you have to do is just like, you know, dance and step 1, 2, go over, and you know, it's the same thing over and over and over again. And I kind of need them to either find a middle ground. So to me, Fru fits in the midway point of like, it's not as hard as an ultimate should be, but it is harder than a Savage fight. So they should actually consider the opportunity to rename a difficulty for whatever could be in between a Savage and an ultimate and just put Fru there. If they call it Futures, let's like call it alternate as like a difficulty just for like for fun. So you got Savage, you know, Savage unlocks alternate and alternate unlocks ultimate, like, you know, ALT versus ULT. So if you have Futures Rewritten alternate, right, it's like the in-between difficulty of a Savage and an ultimate. Ultimate just sounds like it needs to be the strongest piece of content in the game. So like using an alternate storytelling of like, or alternate design of the raids, like kind of just combined into one, where mechanically, like, yes, it's still going to be difficult, but you know, it's still at that level where if you just don't add like a puzzle or make mechanics unrelenting, like body checks and everything like that, and like and you can res, then I would happily say that an alternate raid can fit in that category and it works out fine. I think as a result of this, you can create actual new ultimates so that you have like permadeath or something, and they actually break that threshold of 20 minutes and actually bring it up to 25 and even 30, so that you can actually be like put through the challenge. Because I think that, granted, I've done every single ultimate so far. It's not really like ultimates are fun content. I love them. They're incredible. And I'll never take back my experiences with them. However, once you've done it once and you got the weapon you wanted, and again, like there's a race that's kind of like not seen by them, right? But it's like acknowledged to see who can like clear it first. Like I'm not a race person. I don't care about clearing it first. I just care about being able to do it consistently. I'd rather go in and clear it 20 times in a row and just kind of have my fun. However, because I can just clear it 20 times for fun, it just doesn't really like it doesn't really feel like that appeal for it there. A lot of people don't actually like really doing UWU and UCOB because the luster of those ultimates is kind of like lost its shine. So I think that, not that it's time for them to raise a new tier level, but if they took every single ultimate as it is now and lowered the name of the difficulty to like an alternate, or even like a, I don't know, like Super Savage, you know, something, they can do that and then create a new ultimate where like it's actually insanely difficult, like where it, you know, because if you go back and do the history, like I think it took UCOB like 17 days to figure it out, because like it was just the first level of content that they ever created, period. So I think that now, Dontro's content is designed to be much more challenging than what they experience in Endwalker outside the Ultimates. So as a result, if they just take every single Ultimate and lower that difficulty like a little bit, they actually open up the ceiling for new opportunities of fights to come out, and I'm actually 100% okay with that. Because I don't have an actual problem if they reuse boss fights in terms of the design, right? Like, this whole game is a love letter to the Final Fantasy universe in its entirety. So if we have the ultimate coil of Bahamut, give me like a second Bahamut ultimate that is like a 25-minute gauntlet of like, they're going to put you through the ringer of trial, and you will fail, and it will take you not just a week. It'll take you a longer time than just a single week. It will take you much more than 7 days to clear a super ultimate, if you will. And that way it gives hardcore players, or just anybody who wants to just take on that challenge, you know, time to actually put in the effort and the time to actually do what's necessary, and just kind of get the job done. And like, additional side note, one of the biggest issues that has to be addressed as well, if with the recent race as well, is, and this was also applied in top and DSR, and I don't care about it because it's all stupid. But, you know, this game is not played by the player base in the way that it's actually meant to be played. There's these things that, you know, kind of tell you what to do, where to go, how to do it, even though it's not built into the game if you play on PC, and it's like not accessible to console players. If you know what I'm talking about, that stuff is used by everyone every single day for every single fight in the game, no questions asked. It just is, and that to me is a problem. So, as a result of all of this, like, we already use that stuff. Not we, because I don't. I hate that it exists personally, but all of it exists. And I think that the devs know this. So at this point, you should just say, screw it. And it's like, you know what? Look, if you guys want to use all this crap in order to actually like beat what we think is difficult content, but like kind of let it be what it is, yo, let's just triple the length and make you suffer for an hour. Like, and here's the thing, I'm cool with that. I have no problem with a 40-minute super ultimate that's like 14 phases, and like if I don't do my thing to the T correctly, like not near perfection, but like I need to know what I'm doing in order to play my role and like kill the thing. If you actually design that, like I'll brush through to the side and I'm not worried about it. And again, like, I don't have an issue with them reusing boss fights. If they want to retell a different story with T and like make a different Alexander, I'm okay with that. If you want to redo a story with Eden and make me go through the gauntlet of like fighting 14 bosses, I'm okay with that. Like, I just want them to, like, because there's already so many people that are cheating in content, and it's Fru. Like, Fru is actually, like, to Arthur's point and a lot of other players' points as well that I talked to, they all agree that this is a very easy ultimate in comparison to what they experienced beforehand. This ultimate does not have any appeal in terms of its difficulty. And even with that being said, there's people that are cheating because they can't do the fight regardless. So let's just raise the roof, bring that ceiling up, and just, you know, make the content like very difficult. Make all of the people that want to stream it on the top of basis on a constant rate, like, yo, let Arthur sit in a fight that takes 40 minutes and let him figure it out. Take him, take Xenos, take Whoops, take, you know, Mistech, take Hector, everybody. Put everybody through hell and make an ultimate that literally transcends difficulty. Call it a transcendence. Make a transcendence difficulty and force people to sit there for 40 minutes just to reach one mechanic. Because like an ultimate is designed to be like a timeless experience. They shouldn't be taking the time to clear it in a week and less. I'm actually so down for that. And at least that way it makes people respect the fight, because like players want to suffer. Like, I hate to be the one to admit it, but yo, players want to suffer. Me too. Because like once the fight's over, like this ultimate needs to be able to hold me down for 4 months, and it holds me down for like 2 weeks. And then it's like, okay, now what do I do? Now, I know that to Yoshi's point, he's like, oh, like, you know, there's other games you can go play. Like, sure. But the thing is that, like, a majority of players that play this game on a constant basis, they don't play anything else. They only want to play 14, even the hardcore players. So you might as well just make a piece of content that lets them stay here forever. You know, it's even like a A crazy idea as well is that you just, you know, make the fight again like permadeath, no res. Everybody's job, no res. Or you can do a criterion thing and give everyone one res, and it's only one per player, and like once it's used, that's it. But you know, I mean, again, I like the idea of it being very, very difficult. It doesn't need to be on some like Dark Souls level because like it's whatever, but like that's a whole different game. But this is an MMO and everyone wants a challenge. People go play other MMOs because this game doesn't do that, right? I need them to kind of give us an opportunity. Anyways, one point that he makes very clear as well, Arthars, we had like a whole rant, I'm sorry. Pictomancer. Listen, Pictomancer sucks. I can't be the one to break the news to you, so I'm gonna be very straightforward. The damage that Pictomancer does is too strong. Everybody who complains that that all the jobs being compensated for their damage output to allocate to Pictomancer is unfair. That job it's fine by design and functionality. However, it's too overtuned. That the job is designed to be a selfish DPS because it doesn't have a res. However, for a job that doesn't have a res, it sure has like some decent support. It's got a buff. It's Black Mage 2.0. It's got a shield that it can give to itself or to its party, and it has a button it presses every 2 minutes that just does the same heal as a Cure 3, if not more. Like, why, right? So I need the player base to just accept the fact that instead of buffing every other job to meet Picto, they need to just nerf Picto. Like, I don't want to see this job be eons above like Machinist. Like, Picto does almost triple damage than Machinist. It's actually so insane. I really much don't like that. And here's the thing. I like Picto concept-wise. I've played it. It's fun to play. It's a cool job. However, it's really problematic that, you know, in order to actually clear this current ultimate, despite the DPS check not existing, the DPS check exists if you don't have a Picto. It's actually more appealing now for ultimate players to do the current ultimate of Futures Rewritten without a Pictomancer, because the job is too strong. It actually makes the DPS check very invisible. You can go like Viper, Machinist, and like Black Mage Pictomancer, and like it's actually still too easy for the damage check. You can take the four worst DPS, the 2 worst tanks DPS wise, and the 2 worst healers, and just replace the strongest DPS out of that 4 with a Pictomancer, and it's also still clearable. But like, I genuinely don't like that. I have no problem with them nerfing Pictomancer, or if they're gonna buff everything else up to Pictomancer, then they need to also look at the health that they have on the boss fights, because I'm very convinced that by buffing everything, they don't go back and look at the numbers for the boss fights. Like, I think that's also why Fru's DPS check is non-existent, because even if they didn't have Pictomancer, like, I don't expect them to actually go back and look at the HP total that the boss has in relations to the ultimates. I think that's also why all the older fights are so easy by comparison. Not only because of the gear sinking downward, but because some of the potencies that all those attacks have now were not what they were back then. So like a DPS check doesn't exist for old ultimates, and I needed to kind of consider that. So Arthas' points for Fatebreaker, man, I'm so sad that there is no light elements, because it's literally in the Savage Raids here. I actually wrote this down as well. Hold on. Got my sticky note again. So I personally love the Fatebreaker phase a lot. It is my favorite phase, because it's the one that everyone can't do in Party Finder. It's actually super hilarious. So I actually wrote down what I was hoping to see, because again, with the storytelling of the ultimate, because it's like Metron's influence on Shiva, and Metron uses Shiva's body and power to summon Fatebreaker, the fact that it's unenhanced by darkness is concerning to me. So I think, to my point, the actual phase in its entirety is incredible. However, they should have added not one, they should have added 2 more elements. So right now with the first phase of Fatebreaker, there's lightning and there's fire. There was light in the Savage version and even the normal version, and they just took it out. They should have mixed in light with all of the fire and the lightning randomness, period. Because lightning or light has its own variation. So if you don't know, I'll give you an example. This is Happy's POV of him doing phase 1 and through. Shout out to Happy, you're the GOAT. I love you, man. This move is called Cyclonic Break. What happens in Cyclonic Break is it's charged and then everyone gets hit with a cone on themselves, and it's specifically lightning. Lightning is spread, and then fire is pairs. That's kind of been the constant mechanical functionality in the Savage raid tier and the normal raid tier. Usually when there's like a lightning thing, it's a spread thing. When there's a fire thing, it's a stack thing. The light version, as it was in the Savage raid, was a wild charge. So the healers would have been targeted for a second attack, and it would have needed to be blocked by the DPS. And then the main tank would have been hit with a light debuff that they needed to be blocked by the off tank. The fact that there's no light version of Cyclonic Break is very concerning. They should have kept that in there. It would have been very nice. So as you can see, it's lightning, boom, everyone spreads, and then it kind of like repeats back and forth. And then there's the Powder Mark Buster. Now, this Buster is actually cool. I actually like this Buster a lot. I'm actually like, it's cool, don't change it. Except it should have gone through Invuln, but like, that's just me. Then we have our moment, the boss goes into the middle, then it's Utopian Sky. Now, Utopian Sky is a combination of Prismatic Deception, Blasting Zone, and Elemental Infusion, and the same rules as follows. The Utopian Sky being lightning means that during the Prismatic Deception, you have to spread. If it was fire, you have to do a stack. Now, because it's based off of what is Bound of Faith, which we'll talk about in a little bit, their light version just would have been a puddle that drops under everyone's feet, which I would have been cool with, but they don't have that. Or if it wasn't a puddle under everyone's feet, it would have just been, instead of being like one big stack on the healers kind of thing, it would have just been pairs. It would have targeted either all DPS or all support, and therefore they can't pair together, so they would have to pair with their other partner. So like if it was all support, that means that a DPS would pair with a tank or a healer, so that instead of it being 2 big fire stacks, it would just be 4 smaller stacks that were covered by 2 people each. That would have been the light version, and then the lightning is like everyone is spread out. That would have been perfect. Then that move happens. Then we have ourselves the next Cyclonic Break moment where it is fire. So with the fire version, it's pairs. So once again, everyone spreads. You line up in pairs. And then the boss starts empowering a lightning clone, which is cool because that means that he's powering up 1. Then as a result, it creates the Turn of the Heavens. This puts all the circles out there, and there are only 2 colors in the entire phase. You have blue or red or lightning and fire. If they added 4, you would have had to pay very strong attention to the eyes, which again, I'll talk about later. So if the light one was empowered, at least it would have given you like fire and light, or light and lightning. That way you had to pay attention to like, oh, he's powering up this one, so regardless, just don't go to that one because it's being powered up. And on top of that, there's a boss on the relative west side that you see here that's going to do Burst Strike. That's always lightning. It's always lightning. And then the other one here is going to do Burst Strike Fire, and it's a knockback. And then both of these tethers are going to be Bounds of Faith, which it lifts the person up, and then he's going to kind of go in there and then do like a smash thing. And it's always fire. Every single time it's always fire. And so what they do with this we'll showcase in a little bit, but there was another version of this that they should have totally put in the fight, and they didn't. Now, Fall of Faith is the mechanic where like everyone in Party Finder is suffering in, which is great. However, even still, it's like a little too easy. There should have been another pair of elements, which again is like the light and the dark version. I'll talk about the dark one like later because I made that whole thing up to myself. Like, you can see my notes for it, but I made up a dark element. There should have been a dark element, and there have been 4 to pick from, even though the Savage version had 3. Anyways, so with Fall of Faith, there's gonna be 4 clones or 3 clones in him. He starts powering up 1 color, which is fire, and then there's gonna be like another one that does that. Now what's cool about this mechanic though is that which ones that they pick are entirely random, and I like that. The fact that it can be any of them is really cool, but it would have been even more chaotic and more insane that they could have all been whatever. So in this current example, they're all fire, meaning that there's 4 tethers. Each tether is a stack, followed by a cone hit that must be baited. So you'll see here, first one goes off, kind of hard to see because the north side, but Happy's here for his second one, so it's a lift, and then it goes into this giant fire cone. It's baited by proximity, which is cool. And they just do that 2 more times because there's 4 cones in total. So the third one goes off, and then the fourth one goes off, and then boom, and then it's a burnishing glory, and then that's it. Now, let's talk about these elements. As we mentioned, the light version of Elemental Break or Cyclonic Break is light. It was a wild charge. The shadow version, as I'm going to call it, the shadow version would have just been a big light party stack that everyone has to go in the middle for, but who it picks is entirely random. So similar to like the spread mechanic, where you do this and then it's like a spread thing, and then you go into pairs because it's fire. Instead of them breaking up into like 2 big light parties or like 4 pairs, they should have just done one gigantic big one. But in order for you to actually survive it, it would have had to have everybody go close under the boss during the break to break and get hit and then dodge out. So everyone, because like range and supports or range and melee would like kind of spread accordingly in case it's spread or pairs. But if it was shadow or darkness, then everyone had to go directly under the boss's hitbox, not like there where they couldn't see the boss, because it's really hard to see that, but just to make a big enough stack where if even one person is missing, then 7 people get Mark of Morality, and like that's GG's, because it's impossible to kill the boss with Mark of Morality. So, the lightning version is all spreads. Fire version is pair stacks. The light version would have been a wild charge. I don't know how that would have worked out, but like that's the whole point, was to figure it out. And then the shadow version would have just been everyone has to do one big stack in order to avoid getting Mark, and then you spread accordingly and go do the Turn of the Heavens. Next, we have the Bound of the Faith. Now, the Bound of Faith, the lightning version, he does like a line attack, and then it gets bigger. The fire version is when it's a push after the first hit. So it's a push. You have to go into it to get pushed backwards. The light version, when he actually like hits the gun trigger, then it puts a puddle underneath everyone. And if you stay there, you're going to get hit with light, and it's going to give you light blown up, and then you just die. If there was a dark version, it would have just been like a go underneath the boss. Kind of similar to how they do it with fire, but instead of the knockback, just the outside gets hit. An easy example of this is if you go look up Pandemonium 11 versus Themis. Themis has like a light thing where he does like a cleave, and then it's going to expand. And then it's always followed up with like a stack thing. The dark version is where he does like a cleave, but the outside is not safe and the inside is safe. So that would have just been the dark version of that put into this. And again, because it's entirely random which one it could have been, also the light and dark version, if added to this phase, it would have worked for the entire fight. The last mechanic to talk about is this Bound of Faith attack, where he lifts the character up and then hits him with the attack and then explodes. The lightning version is in here, and what it was in the Savage version was a tank buster. The person who gets lifted with the lightning one would have had to get hit by 2 wide tank buster cones. It was baited by the 2 tanks, only 2 hits, and it was wide. So the tanks had to make space, kind of like how they do now, but you can't see it because they don't have it here. So anyways, it's the lightning version. You have to kind of spread out, so the person gets lifted, and then it's 3 people. It needs to be near, and that way they kind of bait 3 lightnings away from the other party. That's how lightning works. Fire, everyone needs to line up together, and then when they get hit, it targets those 3 people, but it's a body check. So the 3 people have to be together in order to survive it and not get Mark of Morality. There is a light version in the Savage fight and the normal fight. What happens is the person who gets targeted has a circle appear around them, and if they are by themselves, eventually the circle will explode and it'll do like a light raid wide attack. But if somebody else is in that stack with that person with the light one, then they also will explode, meaning that there's, instead of 1 AoE, it's 2. So realistically, if you had 4 people and then this one person got hit with the light one, then there would have been 4 AoEs that gone off, and that would have been a failure, which is cool. I like that, but it's not in this fight. The dark version would have just been I'm gonna call it like a Raven's Dive. If you know UCOB, it's if you know Nail phase, there's like a quote that Nail has in the second phase of UCOB where she will say like, on high I descend, something Hollowed Moon or Iron Chariot, or like whatever. So she's gonna jump on somebody random and then do either a big donut or a big point blank. If you're near the person who gets dived on, then you fly away. And it's impossible to avoid. If you get hit, you just die and you get knocked into the wall. GG's. This would have always targeted, if the person got hit with the Bound of Faith and then the attack went off, the attack would have just targeted one of the two tanks, and they would have gotten hit with like what essentially is like a twister dive. So if the shadow one went off for the Bound of Faith, even like you can still do this mechanic with the shadow and the light one as well. The only difference is that if it's light, everyone has to get away from that person, and if it's a shadow one, the tanks have to get away from the party in order to not hit them with the whatever the twister is. That way, like, it's always in a target. You know, now realistically, if there is a shadow one, then it's going to be like a little bit organized because it can't target a tank. Actually, it's not true. Sorry, it can target a tank. It just automatically targets the other tank, even if they're in a bubble. So it would have required people to actually like use their eyes and pay attention. So like if it's like fire one, then whoever's in fire one and the 3 people there, they would have targeted the cone out. If it was lightning 2, then it would have been the 3 people spread and then it kind of 3-way cone. If it was light, people over here need to get away from that person in order for them to explode, and then they do an AoE that goes off and it's like whatever, then they go back. And then if it was shadow, then let's say if it wasn't a tank, then both tanks, regardless of where they are, would have to get away from the rest of the party so that they can plant, but the tanks move. So in case if one of them get hit, they don't yeet everyone away. But if let's say the shadow person is a tank, then it only targets the other tank, so only they would have to move. Does that make sense? So as a result of all of that, you would have created a phase 1 of Fatebreaker where, as we had assumed there were going to be 3 elements, there could have been 4. I wish I had like Photoshop or something. I can actually like showcase to you dramatically like what to, like, but I'm not artistic enough, so sorry. All right, moving on. Last couple points that Arthars makes is the last phase of Pandora. The visuals were horrible with the extra players. Too much virtual effects. Too much tank responsibility, which makes honestly everyone else kind of boring, unless you're a healer, I suppose. Now, here's my thing about this. Realistically, if you actually go look at the X-Aligns that come from the boss, as well as the Wings of Light and Dark mechanic that's executed by Pandora, the X-Aligns are literally light and dark. So when the actual race teams made it to that point, I was thinking that it doesn't make sense why there's a light and a dark if there's no buff. Because this fight, surprisingly enough, you actually don't get any buff like whatsoever, except for relativity and like rampant, and then crystalline time, only time. But like, unlike the other ultimates, where in, let's say with UCOB, you get the Phoenix Blessing buff, and in Golden, you need to do super damage and whatever, and like, you know, survive. Uwu, you have the Reawakening buffs to kind of activate the LBs. In T, there is the Enigma Codex, which is required to do fake calibration alpha and beta to see your clone do the thing in the future. DSR has the eyes section where you need both eyes in order to fight both buffs from Giselle and Alphino to actually, or Ostrafon to like fight the eyes. And also you got to pass around the morality death one that you have in phase 6, right? And then in top, you need to acquire the Dynamis stacks in order to become fully Dynamaxed, whatever it's called, and then that lets you use an LB. There's nothing like that in Fru. The only thing you have is to deal with debuffs that are resolved in the phase that they're in. So with phase 2, you have light rampant. There's like light debuffs. It's very straightforward. Don't get more than 4 stacks or you die, which is automatically resolved by the mechanic itself. Cool. Ultimate relativity gives everyone an assortment of debuffs with the times in mind, and like how you place it, where you go, when it explodes is determined, and then it's like a teleport, and then you got to just bait away the lasers. Crystalline time, same thing, but like kind of combined with light rampant, and that's literally it. As a result of doing all of that, there is no special buff that's required to like do phase 5. You just go in and just do phase 5. So like that's it, and it doesn't really. It just didn't make sense to me that there was no buff to fight that boss. I was heavily heavily under the impression that there needed to be some kind of like light resistance up or dark resistance up debuff or a buff that you acquire during the fight in order to survive those mechanics from Pandora. But they don't exist. There's no buff. You just the busters that are handled during the final phase are just used by tank invulnerability, which again I should go through. So all you gotta do is just wail at the boss. So once again, to a meme of many players who've completed ultimates time and time again, the Pandora phase is just a sheer victory lap of like, don't get hit by the X's, don't die to the thing in the tower, and don't get hit by the wild charge laser thing, and then like that's it, and you kill the boss. And I think that's unfortunate. Tops and DSRs. Granted, DSR is the same thing, where like it's massive Akmorns, it's Giga Flares, it's Trinity Cleave autos, all that fun stuff. All of those were using debuffs and had a very specific sense of movement, and everything hurt like crazy, and like GG's, right? Top, you could not do top. You could not kill the final boss if you didn't go in with the stack that gave you the necessary amount to get the LB. If you didn't have the LB ready to go, you could not kill the boss. At least that I thought. So the fact that Pandora has nothing like that is just like really unfortunate to me, in my opinion. That's why I'm not too sure why this fight exists in the form that it does, because it almost looks like, despite them working on an ultimate on top of the one that they had with Thornton and Top, that there's this one, it almost feels like that this is not the primary ultimate that they were focused on. I feel like, again, that there's either a missing phase or they have another fight lined up, something different Eden style, and like they just gave us this instead. So there's that too. Last couple points. So the fun of the fight is there if you had fun with Arcadian. However, a lot of people who have done ultimates will most likely not like this one to the highest degree. So, like, to his point, it's not one to remember down the road. It's the potential last major hype raid for a while, especially with the theme in mind, because everyone loved Eden. So the fact that this is what we got as an ultimate, it's a little sad to some people who's... And here's the biggest issue as well, because I know this from experience, from what I've heard from my friends. A lot, and I mean a lot of people started playing Final Fantasy XIV when the release of Shadowbringers came out. So for a metric ton of players, this was their first raid tier. So to get this as an ultimate, to a lot of people, just was a little bit like sad, because it just should have been more cinematically epic like DSR and Top was, but they just weren't. And so as a result, they now have to climb this massive mountain about 7.2 Savage and 7.3's ultimate, because we are in fact getting a second ultimate in 7.3. Like I said before, it's supposed to be potentially Warrior of Light, assuming that they kind of follow the same pattern. If they skipped Stormblood story and they went to Shadowbringers raid, which is Fru, and they don't do that again, we should be getting Shadowbringers story, which would be either Hades or Warrior of Light, which I'm heavily under the theory. I have a theory about it for a while. It's Warrior of Light. The quick theory is that there is no crafted weapon for Warrior of Light that has like a fancy glow. With this current patch, actually in 7.1, we got the diamond weapon, crafted weapon. It's called the Adamant weapons. They use the skeleton design of the diamond weapon from the Shadowbringer trial, but they have a glow now, and you craft them and they look cool. I like them a lot, actually. They're really cool, but the color is like whatever. So the order of trials released, it was actually Titania, then Hades, then Ruby, then Warrior of Light, then Emerald, and then Diamond. They specifically skipped Warrior of Light. Additionally, if you go look at the weapons for Warrior of Light, the actual detail is there actually has the pixel design that looks like an ultimate. So I'm heavily expecting the Warrior of Light to be the weapons that are used at the skeleton model for the next ultimate in 7.3. They're not going to be the same color of like that shiny yellow white that they are, but they're at least going to use those models. So in case you're wondering what the 7.3 models will look like, go to Yulmore in Shadowbringers and look up the Warrior of Light trials, and you will know what they look like. So all in all, as much as everyone was extremely excited for this fight as a whole, I, like a lot of other players, I'm sure, are very disappointed that this ultimate is a lower-ended ultimate in terms of difficulty and cinematic experience. I think overall, they they can simplify the process by just removing their restrictions. There's already enough restrictions in terms of content and job design and game design that they have with mindset to the game as a whole. But the content of the Ultimate is theirs and theirs alone. They have the choice to do whatever they want, how they want to make it. They chose to make Ultimates with the Wandering Minstrel in mind to do retelling what if scenarios of the content storyline wise. I'm actually okay if they break that mold. Give me a 30-minute Ultimate that has me fighting a Tonberry only, and the Tonberry has insane mechanics with Tonberries. I'm down. Give me a Tonberry Ultimate like GG's, I'm cool with that. Or give me a UCOB 2.0, where again, you know, you made your trios, you had your 5 phases, there's an ad, there's Twintania, there's Nail. Give me something that just has like 20 dragons. Like, just let me fight 20 dragons, 20 phases, 20 dragons. I'm cool with that too. Give me an Uwu where instead of having to fight Garuda, Ifrit, and Titan, give me Shiva, Ramuh, and Leviathan. And I'm cool with that as well. With T, instead of like perfect Alexander, let me fight an Alexander that's handled by the goblins. You know, the goblins had their storyline with that part too, which is really cool, and I like that a lot. And the cat is in there, but give me one with the goblins. And, like, let the goblins kind of like take over Alexander and make him goofy looking, but make it like crazy. You know what I mean? Granted, Thoradin is like the big bad, and then like there's Nidhogg. We also got like Ravana and Bismarck, and there's 2 Bismarck, technically speaking. You know, give me an ultimate of that. You know, it doesn't matter. I don't need the story to be cinematically like insane. You know. Plus, like, everyone is hoping to God that there's like a Kefka ultimate. Like, Kefka is kind of godlike, right? And so is Exdeath. You can give me an Exdeath. I know that Omega is like the Stormblood raid, but I'm cool with like the Warring Triad from the Trials of is it Heaven's Ward? It is Heaven's Ward. And then give me Kefka. I'm cool with that too. Give me Kefka, Sophia, Sephiroth, Zervan, Exdeath, boom, ultimate number like 7 or 8, whatever, you know. Eden, give me all the primals. Make a Sin ultimate, Sin primal ultimate. Give me Sin Eater, Leviathan, Titan, rock the Garuda Ifrit hybrid. Give me the Idol of Darkness. Give me Cloud of Darkness. Give me the dog. You know what I mean? And then most importantly, give me like something that involves the 4 lords. Give me something that has more Eden in there. You know, give me some Asians. Give me the turn 7 boss and the turn 11. You know, if you know those bosses, then you know that they're nothing. Like, those bosses just kind of like are there, and like they're just like there. But let me fight like a giant Koyuro. You know, let me fight like a big giant, I don't know, Chocobo. Give me like a March of the Chocobos ultimate. I fight like the rainbow of Chocobos. And then they turn into like a super Chocobo where it has like a cape and like a mask, but it's like the hardest thing in the entire game because like it's like a Chocobo that has like a meteor casting and it goes crazy actually. Let me fight a Chocobo on top of a behemoth that just slings meteors left and right and has a mechanic where you gotta like prevent the meteor. Let me fight all the weapons. Give me Ruby, give me Emerald, give me Diamond, and then give me Sapphire for fun because like why not? And then they're all tied to some kind of random Asian. Yo, I'm down. So here is to the hopeful pace that, you know, they might as well just, and here's the thing too, like, respectively speaking, like 8.0 is not that far away. It is far away, but like it's not, like, there's already plans to like talk about dehomogenization with the jobs in mind. We don't know what that looks like. There's no news about Beastmaster, and there's still more Blue Mage content to come. So there's a lot of things that they can do. I think the most important takeaway piece for this, in summary, is that 1, this ultimate is unfavored by a lot of players that have either progged it or completed it. Congratulations, I'm right around the corner. This is an easier ultimate. They should never make an easier ultimate. If they're going to do that, make a difficulty that goes in between it, or increase the ceiling for that ultimates because, you know, why not? And nerf Picto, because that job is strong for no reason. I mean, like, it's strong, but it's cool. And like, actually the biggest takeaway point from this too is stop making mechanics organized. Actually, give me random. Random is what makes it difficult. If you have it too structured and too organized, it becomes too obvious. Like, if you have like a building built, but you're like, find the missing piece, but there's just a piece missing that you can blatantly see with your eyes, and it's like, okay, cool, let's just like take that off. And then the building comes crashing down. That's too obvious, you know? People want to look at a blueprint, want to figure out like people want to do math. Not really though, but people want to do math. People want to figure out how to like suffer in the ultimates. The ultimates are accessible to anybody who rises up to the challenge to do the ultimate. No one is gatekept or shied away from doing the ultimate. The objective to actually do the ultimate is very simple. Clear the fourth fight. The restriction can be much more difficult, but it's not. So, like, even as not difficult as M4S is, everyone is just skipping 1 through 3 and just clearing M4. And even with their level 720 item level crafted augmented gear, guess what? They're just going into Fru to like experience Fru, and they're dying. But they don't know that, right? They just want to like go see the ultimate because it gets Eden. So make the ultimate hard, please. Make very hard content. I want to suffer for months. I don't want to suffer for like 6 days. I love you all. Square Enix and friends alike. So thank you for watching and tuning in. I really hope Arthars and Xenos' videos are not going to be this long. Like, we'll see. But I 110% agree to everything that Arthars has said in this video, except for the Uwu thing. This difficulty is probably 3rd place. I think right now the difficulty in order is from top to bottom. It's top, DSR, Fru, UCOB, Uwu, T. That's the order. Have a good night.